Debate 109, Britta comes away believing she successfully faked going under, and everybody accepts her version because Pierce spent the session looking like an incompetent old man. The series then spends 5 more seasons returning to Britta's sexuality, her memories, Pierce's manipulation resume, his remarkable accuracy about her future behavior, and her eventual admission that she is exceptionally susceptible to covert influence. Put those scenes in sequence, and Pierce's hypnosis stops looking like an isolated smoking joke. Pierce got into Britta's head, and the show withholds the part that would tell us exactly what he left there. The missing interval. The crucial material is the material we do not receive, and Debate 109 withholds it twice. Pierce conducts 2 hypnosis sessions with Britta, and both contain missing sections. The first session establishes the procedure. Pierce tells Britta that gorilla is the word that will bring her back out. He then falls, injures himself, and begs her to wake up without using the word he has just identified as the means of ending the state. The episode leaves the session there. We next encounter Britta telling Jeff that Pierce wants another session. Everything between Pierce's accident and Britta's conversation with Jeff therefore happens outside our view. The show establishes a release mechanism and does not show Pierce using it. The second session enters even later. Pierce is already speaking to Britta as though the procedure is underway, telling her what will happen when she sees a cigarette and describing her as being under so deep. We do not see the induction that precedes this. The episode drops us into the middle of a hypnosis session and then lets Britta tell us afterward what she thinks happened. That editing choice is the foundation of the whole joke. A familiar television hypnosis gag has someone insist hypnosis cannot work, go under, perform something ridiculous, wake up and insist once again that hypnosis did not work. The comedy comes from the hypnotized person believing they were conscious and in control while the audience knows otherwise. Community withholds the audience's privileged position. We do not receive the missing interval Britta cannot independently verify. We get Britta's account of her own consciousness. That matters because Britta's certainty cannot prove that nothing happened. She is claiming continuous awareness across intervals the episode deliberately removes. If Pierce implanted the belief that she had remained conscious, had merely been humoring him, or had successfully resisted him, her later testimony would sound exactly the way it does. The audience occupies Britta's position. We possess the same incomplete memory she does. Cigarettes are the tell. Smoking cessation is supposedly why Britta agreed to any of this. Pierce announces one objective, gets Britta's consent under that objective. Then the suggestion we actually hear turns cigarettes into a sexual association involving Pierce. Britta later discovers that the association took. She returns to Pierce and tells him that cigarettes now trigger what he put there. Whatever Britta thought she was doing, consciously during the session did not protect her from the result. She believed she was performing compliance while remaining untouched by the process, and Pierce's suggestion remained in her mind afterward. That is the first thing the show tells us about Pierce's hypnosis. Britta thinks it did not work, then discovers that it did. The unused release word makes the scene stranger. Pierce explicitly establishes that one particular word will end the hypnotic state, then apparently faces an emergency and does not use it. The physical joke concerns Pierce getting crushed by his own setup. The psychological joke leaves a procedure open that the episode never closes for us. Pierce does not need to have staged the original accident for the larger manipulation to work. He only needs to understand what the accident gives him. Britta now believes she has watched an old man fail catastrophically at hypnosis. Pierce has gained the most useful thing a manipulator can have, which is somebody who is certain he cannot manipulate them. The Genius Edit Debate 109 spends its other major plot on Abed apparently predicting the future. Abed eventually explains that he has no supernatural power. He studies people closely enough to predict what they will probably do. Near the end, Abed suggests that one of his future films could reveal Pierce to be an actual genius. Shirley says that will not happen. Abed agrees. Britta immediately enters and tells Pierce that the hypnosis worked. Then she calls him a genius. Pierce's next concern is the identity of the third person in the threesome. That edit is doing far more than closing two unrelated plots. Abed appears supernatural because he understands people and nobody notices the observation behind the prediction. Pierce appears incompetent because everyone assumes there is no deeper understanding behind his behavior. Within the same episode, Pierce catches Britta deceiving him, continues the interaction while knowing something she does not know, he knows, leaves her with an association she believed she had resisted, and receives the exact label that Abed had just declared impossible. The episode calls Pierce a genius twice within seconds. The first time is a joke about how absurd the idea would be. The second time comes from the person Pierce just successfully influenced. Then Community moves on. That is how Pierce gets hidden in plain sight throughout the series. The humiliating surface joke prevents the viewer from asking what else happened underneath it. The confession inside the rant. Years later, Pierce tells Britta that some of her memories exist because he implanted them. That statement matters because Pierce does not describe ordinary persuasion. He claims authorship of memory itself. He says this in the same exchange where he calls Britta a weapon designed for sex. Memory implantation and sexual programming are placed beside each other by Pierce himself, which directly reaches back to the hypnosis episode. Pierce immediately buries the confession under exaggeration. He claims that Britta only thinks she lived in New York and says that she has never lived anywhere. Obviously, Britta has lived somewhere. Season 6 eventually confirms that her New York apartment was real because her parents remember sending mail there. That does not erase the memory implantation confession. It explains how Pierce hides it. Pierce tells Britta something enormous, then attaches it to something absurd enough that she can dismiss the entire statement. He gets to announce his power and preserve plausible deniability in the same sentence. This is a recurring Pierce behavior. He says something revealing about himself, immediately behaves like an idiot, and lets everybody decide that the revealing part must have been nonsense too. The New York chronology makes the choice even stranger. Britta never invokes New York during the episodes before Pierce hypnotizes her. New York becomes one of her defining conversational habits afterward. Pierce eventually claims responsibility for those memories. Season 6 proves that New York itself existed. It does not tell us what Pierce said during the hypnosis material the series withheld. Pierce's New York claim therefore functions beautifully as a false example attached to a true confession. He overstates the specific thing so aggressively that nobody has to consider the broader statement that he has implanted things in Britta's mind. The professional record. The professional tells us that manipulation was not merely some hobby he discovered at Greendale. He says he used to give seminars on manipulation. When Alan admires Jeff's capacity for mind games, Pierce dismisses Jeff as an amateur. Pierce talks about psychological manipulation as something he studied, practiced, and taught professionally. The scene immediately humiliates Pierce. That is important because Community repeatedly uses humiliation as camouflage whenever Pierce says something that would otherwise require the group to take him seriously. The series then spends years validating the resume. Intermediate documentary filmmaking shows Pierce constructing individualized psychological attacks around vulnerabilities he has quietly cataloged. He knows what LeVar Burton does to Troy. He understands Jeff's father wound. He understands Shirley's insecurities. He understands Annie's relationship with authority and approval. He understands how much abuse the group will tolerate because they feel guilty about his apparent condition. He does not merely insult people. He builds situations designed to produce particular responses from particular people. Cooperative polygraphy proves that he continued doing this for years. Pierce possesses enough secrets, private observations, and psychological information to turn the entire group against itself after his death. The joke is that Pierce was paying attention all along. Everybody else assumed that his inability to behave appropriately meant he could not understand what anybody else was doing. The series repeatedly demonstrates that those are entirely different abilities. Pierce can fail to read a social convention and still understand exactly where Jeff hurts. He can misunderstand ordinary friendship and still know precisely what Troy fears. He can appear completely oblivious and still spend years collecting everybody's secrets. Being underestimated funds his manipulation. I knew it. 8 episodes after the hypnosis, physical education gives us an important and intermediate step. Britta proposes Joe from the Facts of Life as her template for making Ebed sexually attractive. She immediately qualifies the suggestion by saying she means the male version. Pierce says, "I knew it." That line is doing more work once it is placed back beside the hypnosis. Pierce previously gave Britta sexual suggestions involving another woman. Months later, Britta casually volunteers a woman as her reference point for sexiness, and Pierce immediately treats it as confirmation of something he believes about her. He does not begin making the argument after Paige appears. He believes he is tracking something that has been developing. The production history adds another level. Dan Harmon has said that his original mental image of Britta during casting resembled Joe from the Facts of Life. Britta therefore names the woman associated with the original conception of her own character while describing sexual attractiveness. Then Pierce instantly treats the answer as evidence. The joke works perfectly without knowing any of that. Knowing it gives the joke another floor. That is how Community repeatedly rewards obsessive viewing. One line works immediately. Another scene months later changes its meaning. A production detail or later episode changes it again. The Beetlejuice gag trained viewers to understand that the series was willing to build a joke across years and trust that most people would miss it. Pierce and Britta deserve to be read with the same patience. The prepared statement. By the time Paige appears, Pierce has been telling Britta she is lesbian for roughly 18 months. Britta herself says so. When Britta reveals that she has become close with a lesbian, she looks toward Pierce because she expects him to react. Everybody else turns toward him too. Pierce says he has nothing prepared off the cuff. Then he produces several pages. This is one of the strangest Pierce moments in the series when taken literally. He has privately imagined some version of Britta moving toward a woman, written an extended statement about that event, kept the document with him, and waited until circumstances made it useful. The opening credits swallow almost the entire speech. Once again, the show tells us that Pierce said a great deal to Britta and then deliberately refuses to let us hear it. Jeff later says that surprisingly large portions of the statement were supportive. Pierce closes with good luck and bon appetit. In a speech about Britta moving toward a lesbian relationship, bon appetit carries the obvious oral sex double meaning. Pierce has spent several unseen paragraphs addressing Britta's relationship with a woman and closes by wishing her a good appetite. The line also reaches backward toward the sexual future Pierce described during hypnosis. His original fantasy involved Britta eventually bringing another woman into a sexual situation involving him. Now Pierce appears remarkably supportive as Britta starts moving toward women. That does not look random when placed beside everything before it. The Jeff tag helps disguise how strange the Britta document is. Pierce says that he has something prepared for Jeff too. We never see comparable pages. The moment immediately returns to the familiar joke where Pierce questions Jeff's sexuality or masculinity. The audience can therefore file the entire scene under Pierce being Pierce. That self-undermining is useful. His Britta statement contains the revelation. His Jeff comment gives everyone permission to dismiss it. The Dance the Page episode then delivers the territory Pierce has been describing. Britta announces that she and Paige are attending the dance together and jokes that she hopes she stays straight. That joke matters because Britta introduces the possibility herself. She is actively placing same-sex experimentation into the conversation before anything physical has happened. At the dance, Britta and Paige begin finding ideological reasons to increase their physical intimacy. They notice people watching them and decide that displaying their comfort might challenge the crowd's assumptions. Then they kiss publicly. Britta frames the act as political progress. Her own established politics tell us that explanation is inadequate. Earlier that season, Britta attacks Annie for sexualizing herself while raising money for the oil spill. Britta understands that male enthusiasm for female sexual performance does not automatically equal liberation. She understands the male gaze well enough to lecture Annie about exploiting it. The dance demonstrates exactly what Britta had warned about. The men watching Britta and Paige respond because they find the kiss sexually exciting. When Britta later embraces Annie, another man immediately tells them to kiss too. Nobody has been educated. The crowd has simply converted the women's intimacy into entertainment. Britta should understand this because she has already explained the mechanism herself. That is why her conscious explanation deserves scrutiny. Britta says she is demonstrating tolerance. Paige believes something similar from the other direction. Each woman uses ideology to move further into an encounter neither initially understands. Their political reasoning does not explain why they keep escalating after the stated political purpose has plainly failed. Pierce sits directly beside the unexplained part. He gave Britta a sexual suggestion involving another woman. He later interpreted her Joe comment as confirmation. He spent 18 months repeatedly telling her that she was moving in this direction. He wrote pages for the moment she became close with a lesbian. He closed the statement with a joke about oral sex between women. Britta then arrives at the kiss through reasoning that feels entirely self-generated. That is exactly how effective suggestion would have to work on Britta. A weapon designed for sex, Pierce's phrase reaches backward as well as forward. In modern warfare, Britta and Jeff have sex during paintball. Britta immediately returns to the competition and points her weapon at him. Jeff has already removed the ammunition. He says he did it when Britta started seducing him. Britta insists the seduction was not tactical. The distinction matters to Britta because she wants the sexual encounter to have been genuine. The visual construction still places sex, manipulation, competition, and armed betrayal inside the same continuous sequence. Years before Pierce calls Britta a weapon designed for sex, Community gives us its most literal possible image of Britta combining sex and a weapon. The unloaded gun becomes another recurring Pierce and Jeff connection. Jeff anticipates Britta's move and silently alters her weapon before she knows anything has changed. Pierce later sabotages Jeff's weapon during another paintball conflict. Both men regularly operate one move earlier than everyone around them. They allow the target to believe the situation remains unchanged until the moment action becomes impossible. That is essentially Pierce's manipulation style in miniature. Subway makes the metaphor literal. The subway plot takes Pierce's weapon designed for sex language and turns it into an actual strategy. Pierce and Shirley recruit Britta because Rick's attraction to her gives them access to Subway. Pierce pushes Britta to maintain Rick's interest. He wants information. He uses Britta's sexuality as the route by which that information can be obtained. Britta eventually tries to remove herself from the operation because the relationship becomes real for her. Pierce continues. The man who says Britta is a weapon designed for sex then deploys her sexuality as a weapon. The episode's title makes the underlying joke even more explicit. Digital exploration of interior design contains a sexual pun involving fingers, while the entire story turns around corporate control, sexual control, and who is operating whom. Britta begins by describing Rick as a corporate puppet. She condemns the idea of somebody having a hand inside him and controlling him. Pierce spends the episode treating Britta in remarkably similar terms. Britta believes she is rebelling against corporate interference, while Pierce is using her rebellion as part of his own plan. That is why Pierce's manipulation of Britta is so effective. Britta needs to experience the action as resistance. Level 7 susceptible Rick eventually returns as a guerrilla marketer. That makes the psychological theme explicit. Guerrilla marketing is built around influence that does not announce itself as influence. Rick studies how susceptible people are to suggestion and identifies the Dean as a level 7 susceptible. Britta eventually says that she is one too. That admission matters enormously when placed at the end of her history with Pierce. Britta knows Rick is bad for her. Annie tells her directly that the self-destructive part of her wants to run toward him. Britta agrees. Then she runs toward him. Her intellectual understanding provides no immunity. By the end of the episode, Britta finally names the problem herself. She is highly susceptible, even when she consciously recognizes the manipulation. That is the bookend to Debate 109. Early Britta believes that seeing the manipulation means defeating it. Late Britta understands that awareness and immunity are different things. She can recognize what someone is doing and still do what they want. Pierce discovered that much earlier. Why Britta? Britta is an unusually useful target because she needs her choices to feel like rebellion. Tell Britta directly what to do and she will resist. Give her an authority to oppose. a corporation to hate, a damaged person to rescue, a sexual norm to challenge, or an oppressive structure to defy, and she will generate the behavior herself. That makes Britta perfect for indirect manipulation. Rick works because his corporate ownership lets Britta interpret her attraction as liberation. Blade works because emotional unavailability gives her something to chase. Troy becomes more attractive once she thinks he is damaged. Her hatred of Avatar becomes another marker of this stubborn self-conception. By season 6, Rick's marketing work requires her to pretend she likes something she has opposed for years, which makes the lie unusually personal. Abed explicitly identifies one piece of Britta's pattern when he explains that she gravitates toward damaged men because their instability allows her to feel comparatively healthy. Troy hears that information and experiments with it. He presents himself as damaged. Britta kisses him. Troy later understands Britta well enough to explain her attraction to men who treat her badly. The hurricane exchange gives us an early version of the same relationship. Jeff calls Britta a hurricane. Troy reacts enthusiastically. Jeff has to explain that hurricanes are bad. Troy says he knows. That answer means Troy understands the metaphor and likes the destructive quality anyway. Later in the same episode, while Troy is the sober person responsible for driving everybody home, Britta tells him to crash Jeff's car. The hurricane has become literal behavior beside him. Troy knows what he is attracted to. Britta repeatedly has less understanding of why she is attracted to what attracts her. That difference makes her susceptible. Britta's parents and the memory problem. Britta's parents give the series another story about memory, authority, and who gets to define Britta's past. In season 6, Britta confronts them with specific childhood events that shaped her. They barely remember them. They acknowledge that they were bad parents during that period, so the episode does not dismiss Britta's pain as imaginary. The disturbing thing is that events Britta built her identity around barely exist in the memory of the people who caused them. Britta therefore encounters another version of the same problem. She believes she knows what happened to her. Other people possess information surrounding those experiences that she does not. Her parents have their version. Pierce claims another kind of access altogether. He is the only person who says he did not merely witness or misunderstand Britta's memories. He says he wrote some of them. That is why the New York line matters even after New York itself is verified. Pierce does not need New York to be imaginary for his confession about implantation to matter. New York gives him a ridiculous example he can safely be wrong about. The larger confession survives underneath it. Why Jeff Pierce's interest in Britta also runs through Jeff. Pierce wants Jeff's attention, Jeff's respect, and Jeff's position inside the group. Jeff is the person everyone organizes around, which is exactly the role Pierce believes he should possess. Britta has access to Jeff that Pierce does not. She can provoke him, she can attract him, she can embarrass him, she can push him into actions he resists when Pierce asks directly. That makes Britta useful even when she has no idea she is helping Pierce. The series shows the indirect route working. Pierce wants Jeff involved in his social plans, Jeff resists, and Britta becomes part of the pressure that ultimately gets Jeff there. Pierce does not need an instrument to know that it is an instrument. He needs to know which grievance, attraction, insecurity, or desire will move the person in the useful direction. Jeff and Pierce share that ability. That is one reason Pierce functions so effectively as a possible future Jeff. Both men read people. Both locate insecurity. Both understand leverage. Both can arrange situations so another person walks voluntarily toward the outcome they wanted. Jeff's development depends on learning that understanding people gives him responsibility toward them. Pierce keeps using understanding as ownership. He wants intimacy and belonging and repeatedly tries to manufacture them through control. Pierce's incompetence is part of the method. This is where the running joke about everyone underestimating Pierce becomes important. Pierce frequently seems desperate to prove that people underestimate him. The group usually assumes he means his usefulness. The darker joke is that they also underestimate his capacity for manipulation. Pierce's incompetence gives him cover. People say things around him because they think he will not understand. They reveal weaknesses because they think he will forget. They dismiss his grandiose statements because he follows them with something stupid. They accept his failures as proof that no deeper plan could exist. That is exactly the environment a manipulator would want. Pierce also enjoys revealing himself just enough to feel powerful. He cannot resist telling Jeff that he taught manipulation seminars. He cannot resist telling Britta that he implanted memories. He cannot resist announcing that he knew something before everyone else. Then he buries the admission under exaggeration, prejudice, insult, or absurdity. He wants the thrill of confession without surrendering the protection of disbelief. The objection. The obvious objection says Pierce is merely a lecherous old man. The hypnosis is a single episode joke, and nobody planned a 6-season Britta manipulation arc during season 1. The theory does not require every beat to have existed in a writer's room document in 2009. Television develops recursively. Writers create a character trait, notice what it implies, return to it, complicate it, and eventually make earlier scenes mean more than they meant when first written. Community does this constantly. A joke becomes a callback. The callback becomes characterization. The characterization produces a later story. The later story changes the original joke again. Pierce says he understands manipulation. The series later gives him 2 of its most elaborate psychological operations. Pierce says he implanted memories in Britta. The series had previously depicted him hypnotizing Britta and leaving her with a suggestion that survived her conscious resistance. Pierce insists on a particular reading of Britta's sexuality. The series gives him the Joe moment, 18 months of repetition, a prepared document, bon appetit, the kiss, subway, and eventually Britta describing herself as highly susceptible. At some point, coincidence stops being the interesting reading. The more interesting reading is that Community kept writing forward from something it had planted earlier. The third joke. The show could eventually settle everything with a flashback. It could replay the missing hypnosis material and let us hear every suggestion Pierce gave Britta. That would make the joke smaller. The version we have is better because the audience experiences exactly the uncertainty Britta experiences. We know Pierce hypnotized her across 2 sessions. Both sessions contain missing material. He establishes a release word, and the series never shows him using it. A post-hypnotic association survives Britta's conscious resistance. Abed calls the possibility of Pierce being a genius absurd. Then Britta immediately calls Pierce a genius because the suggestion worked. Pierce later says he used to teach manipulation professionally. He demonstrates that ability repeatedly. He says outright that he implanted memories in Britta. He connects those memories with calling her a weapon designed for sex. He reads Britta's Joe remark as confirmation of something he believes is happening. He reinforces that belief for 18 months. He possesses several prepared pages when Britta moves toward a lesbian relationship. Most of those pages are hidden from us. He closes with bon appetit. Britta then rationalizes a public kiss with Paige through politics, even though she has previously explained why that exact male response does not represent liberation. Pierce later recruits her sexuality for espionage. Rick eventually returns through a storyline about covert persuasion. Britta finally describes herself as a level 7 susceptible. That is too much interconnected material to file under an old man falling over beside a tuba. The first joke is that Pierce thinks he is a master manipulator. The second joke is that everybody knows Pierce is ridiculous. The third joke is that Pierce spent 6 seasons telling everybody what he could do, and being ridiculous was part of why nobody believed him.